It's a tremendous blessing to be able to interview today Father Maximos Constas. Father Maximos, welcome to St. Andrew Church. We are in the sacred 40-day period after the repose of the highly esteemed and deeply respected elder of Mount Athos, Father Aimilianos, the one-time abbot of the Holy Monastery of Simonopetra, who fell asleep in the Lord on the 9th of this month, on the feast day of the great martyr Christopher and the holy prophet Isaiah. Father Aimilianos has had a tremendous edifying influence on Orthodox Christians and many beyond the Church throughout the whole world, on my life and many of my fellow priests' lives, and I know especially on your life, Father Maximos. Most of our viewers of this interview will know you well, but for the sake of some who might, I'd like to make just a small introduction of Father Maximos. Father Maximos is a priest and archimandrite of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese here in America. He is an esteemed patristic scholar and resides at next to Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in Boston, where he has taught for years. This is after a distinguished career as a professor of theology at Harvard Divinity School. He is also a tonsured monk of the monastery of Simonopetra on Mount Athos, where he spent many years as a monk. We are in great debt to you, Father, for the gargantuan labor of translating so many of the works of Father Aimilianos into the English language, as well as your incredible work translating St. Maximus the Confessor. Really, we're in your debt. We're tremendously in your debt. And I thank you for entertaining this brief interview on the life and influential teachings of Elder Aimilianos. Would you share with us, Father, a little bit about the life of Father Aimilianos and help us have a sense of his own personal biography?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, I suppose the first thought that comes to mind is that it's really difficult to take the measure of a man's life. I mean, and that's true, I think, even for what we might call an ordinary human life, or how much more difficult in the case of someone like this, who is just an outstanding, sort of towering figure who did so much amazing work and influenced so many people. I think it'll be a long time, and a blessed long time, before we, as we continue to come to terms with just the elder and his contribution. I mean, he was born in the 1930s and entered monastic life in the 60s, and very quickly attracted a very devoted circle of students and disciples around him, who ended up becoming monks and nuns in monasteries that he established. I think around 1973, his brotherhood moved from Meteora in central Greece to the monastery of Simonopetra, while the nuns were established in the convent of Ormilia, which, as many people know, is one of the more outstanding monastic houses in Greece, with well over 100 nuns and committed to all kinds of really just great work. And I suppose around 1995, the elder began to show signs of an illness that would eventually require him to retire. And in 2000, he was replaced by the current abbot, Elder Eliseos, which is the Greek way of saying Elisha. And Elisha, of course, was the disciple and successor of the prophet Elijah. So we do have this nice continuity between the elder and his successor, Elder Eliseos.
How is it that Americans like myself could be familiar with Elder Aimilianos? How is it that a man who's retired to the monastery, so to speak, could have such a profound influence on contemporary orthodoxy?
Well, it's sort of like the way in which icons don't have walls or ceilings on them. I mean, events that took place indoors are not boxed in inside of houses. They're depicted as having taken place outside. I think something similar happened here. I mean, the grace that this man bore, and the energy that God gave him, and just the torrent of sort of divine speech that poured forth from his lips was something that could not be contained within the confines of the monastery. And it's also the case, of course, that he was just this extraordinary speaker. I mean, a mesmerizing speaker with this sort of large eyes and very expressive features, with a incredible command of the language and of rhetoric. And while he wrote very little, he spoke quite prolifically. And the monastery archive has a series of recordings of his talks that number around 3,000.
Incredible.
3,000 talks, which means he was giving about 100 or so formal or semi-formal talks for a period of every year for 30 years.
Incredible.
So through his preaching in Greece and Cyprus, and later on through the transcription and publication of his works, he has become increasingly known to a larger public.
What was his pedagogical schedule? Did he have fixed days on which he would deliver talks? How do you deliver 100 substantial talks every year for 30 years?
Well, I mean, you don't. I mean, it's really a remarkable thing. I think, again, we're talking about somebody who was really on fire with God, and his strength and abilities and powers as a speaker and as a pastor and as a monastic leader, they just go beyond, I mean, anything that we could consider to be sort of normal or ordinary. But as far as your question goes, there's sort of, most of it followed the typical monastic routine. I mean, the elder was a born teacher. I mean, he was gifted with the gift of speech. And as in many monastic sort of traditions or orders, he would speak to the community on Sundays in the refectory, or later on in the afternoon, or always great feast days, or on the days where vigils were celebrated, later on in that day after rest was taken. These were always opportunities for, really for teaching. I mean, it's a catechism in a sense. It's an ongoing education of the brotherhood. It's an ongoing initiation, not simply into monastic life, but an ongoing initiation into the life of the church, which means into the life of Christ. So.
Am I right to think, Father, that he also left the monastery in order to missionize and to preach and interact with lay people? It seems that in the reading that I've done of him, he also speaks about many very contemporary, relevant themes in the lives of lay people.
Well, there's not a whole lot of reason to leave a place when 10 and 20,000 visitors a year go to that place.
Sure.
So he did leave the Holy Mountain in response to invitations from local hierarchs throughout Greece, and he would travel. Greece is a small country. He would travel to different cities and maybe sometimes give 2 or 3 talks in the same city, sometimes on the same day, while he was there. He was also beloved by people in Cyprus, and undertook trips there as well. So yeah, through visitors at the monastery and his own sort of presence in the Church of Greece and elsewhere, he became known to many people.
I've heard also that he played a fundamental role in the rejuvenation of Athonite monasticism in the 20th century. Is that accurate?
It is. This is really just a fascinating phenomenon. And a number of very good things have been written about it, but in broad brushstrokes, I mean, around the early 1960s, the monastic population of Monte Athos appeared to be at an all-time low. Most of the monasteries had only a small number of very old monks, and there were no new novices on the horizon. And I think I don't remember the year exactly, 1961 maybe, or 61, there was the 1,000 year anniversary of Monte Athos. That was the 1,000 year anniversary of the establishment of the great Lavra, which was the first Cenobitic monastery established there. And this was a huge celebration. The King of Greece was there, Orthodox patriarchs were there, heads of Orthodox states were there. And the inside joke among the participants was that they had come, in fact, to celebrate the funeral of Mount Athos.
To bid farewell.
To bid farewell. And right around that same time, the first novice showed up after none had shown up in a very long time. So things began to change. In other words, at this sort of nadir in the history of the mountain, things unexpectedly turned around because the Greek state had been planning to move all of the remaining monks into one monastery and turn the rest of the peninsula, the rest of Mount Athos, into a tourist destination. And the only thing that prevented them from doing it in a timely manner was the sheer logistics of securing and guarding a place of that size. That never happened, and in the meantime, new monks began to show up. So,
amongst which were Father Aimilianos about 10 years after that, you said? In the early 70s?
Right. It's really a very, very interesting sort of phenomenon, and I mean, it gives witness to the activity of God in His church and sort of the Spirit moving within history, because we essentially had two sources from which the Holy Mountain was rejuvenated or repopulated, an internal source and an external source. I mean, the most important internal source were the disciples of Elder Joseph the Hesychast, who became abbots of multiple monasteries and attracted new young monks to those monasteries. Among the abbots who came from outside of the mountain are people like Elder Aimilianos, Elder Alexios of Xenophontos, Elder George of Grigoriou. So we had new life sort of emerging within the mountain, and new life coming from outside of the mountain, the two coming together to create this phenomenon, a kind of renaissance in a sense of life on the Holy Mountain.
The writings, the teachings of Father Aimilianos are so saturated with Holy Scripture. His insight, especially to the Old Testament, his devotion to the Psalms drips from the pages of the stenographers who wrote down, or I don't know if he wrote them himself or not, of his text. But what was, am I right to think that there is a special connection that he had with the Psalter, and that he actually was able to pass on to the monastery and to the world?
Yeah, the elder was, a deeply learned man. He had a degree in theology from the University of Athens, but beyond that, he was a devoted reader and spent much of his time, studying the writings of the Fathers of the Church, Byzantine monastic foundation documents, and everything that was relevant to the life of the monastery was something that he read and often commented on. Among his beloved books, in a sense, was the Old Testament. He had a very special and a very deep devotion to the Old Testament. Part of that can be seen in one of his works, which is available in English, and it's his commentary on a number of select Psalms, which I consider to be a sort of masterpiece of Orthodox spiritual exegesis. On the one hand, they're informed by, let's say, the best of the historical critical tradition, because he was aware of that level of literature, but his audience, of course, is a monastic audience, and the aim is to edify and to inspire. And his interpretation, his exegesis of these Psalms, it really has to be read to be appreciated. There's really nothing quite like it. Also related to his interest in the Old Testament was the revival of the singing of the Psalms in the monastic liturgy. Ancient monks spend most of their time reciting the Psalter, and the Psalter is still read once a week in its entirety in a monastery that's able to do that. But they were no longer sung. And through the very talented chanters that were in the monastery, the elder encouraged the revival of psalm singing. So one of the musical books that the monastery has published is a very large collection of psalms that are set to music. And some of these, most people are familiar with the hymn to the Virgin, the Agni Parthene, but the psalms also deserve to be better known. Some of them have been translated into English and they're being sung in different places, but, you know.
Could you share with us